What meteorologists are calling a once-in-a-generation weather disaster has completely overwhelmed the Australian state of Queensland. A powerful atmospheric river has parked itself over the region, unleashing non-stop rainfall that has swallowed entire towns, torn apart critical infrastructure, and triggered the largest emergency rescue effort Queensland has seen in modern history. The crisis began in early January of 2026, when a slow-moving low-pressure system combined with an intensified La Niña pattern stalled over the Coral Sea. What started as heavy tropical rain quickly spiraled into a full-scale catastrophe. Over just 3 days, parts of southeast Queensland and the Wide Bay Burnett region were hit with more than 23 inches of rain, more than some areas normally see in an entire year. Once the ground became fully saturated, there was nowhere for the water to go. Major river systems, including the Brisbane, Bremer, and Mary rivers, began rising at terrifying speed. Banks were breached, flash flood warnings were issued, and residents were forced to flee for higher ground, many of them waking up in the middle of the night to rushing water already at their doors. The destruction spans both cities and farmland. In Brisbane, the capital, river levels climbed to heights not seen since the devastating floods of 2011. Low-lying neighborhoods were inundated as floodwaters poured into homes, streets, and businesses. Transportation has taken a major hit. Officials report that more than 900 miles of roadway across the state have been damaged or made completely impassable, cutting off communities and slowing emergency response. And as the rain continues to fall, Queensland is facing a growing humanitarian crisis, one shaped by water, isolation, and a race against time. The damage to transportation has been crippling. Key sections of the Bruce Highway were cut off, effectively isolating parts of Queensland from the southeast corner of the state. Rail services were shut down after tracks were torn away by floodwaters, and Brisbane's ferry terminals suffered major structural damage as debris slammed into them at dangerous speeds. At the peak of the storm, power outages spread rapidly. Utility officials reported more than 120,000 homes and businesses left in the dark. Several substations were taken offline to prevent electrical hazards as floodwaters rose, and in remote areas, communication towers failed, leaving thousands of people unable to call for help. Emergency crews have been working non-stop. Queensland Fire and Emergency Services, along with the State Emergency Service, have been conducting round-the-clock rescue operations. Since the flooding began, swift-water rescue teams have carried out more than 450 successful rescues. But the disaster has not been without loss. Authorities have confirmed 5 fatalities, people who were swept away while attempting to drive or walk through floodwaters. State leaders have issued urgent warnings to the public, stressing a simple but critical message: if a road is flooded, don't take the risk. In the town of Gympie, which experienced its worst flooding in decades, the strength of the community has stood out amid the devastation. As soon as waters began to recede, volunteers, often called mud armies, moved in with shovels and pressure washers, helping neighbors clear out homes and begin the long recovery. The economic impact is expected to be staggering. Queensland's agricultural sector has been hit hard. Thousands of cattle have been lost in inland regions, while sugarcane fields and fruit farms in the north have been severely damaged or destroyed. Economists warn that supply chain disruptions could drive grocery prices higher across Australia, especially for fresh produce. The insurance industry is also bracing for a surge in claims. Early estimates suggest insured losses alone could exceed $1.5 billion, making this one of the costliest natural disasters in the state's history. As Queensland begins the long road to recovery, the scale of the destruction is becoming clear, and so is the resilience of the people facing it. This latest disaster has reignited a heated debate over urban planning and how prepared cities really are for a changing climate. Environmental scientists say storms like this are becoming more frequent and more intense as the atmosphere warms. They argue that communities can no longer be designed for weather patterns of the past. According to climate researchers, drainage systems, flood barriers, and even home construction standards need to be rethought for a future where extreme rainfall is no longer rare, but expected. In response, the Queensland government has announced an initial recovery package worth hundreds of millions of dollars, aimed at emergency relief and restoring critical services. But experts warn that short-term funding alone won't be enough. They say true resilience will require major changes in how water catchments are managed, how cities expand, and where people are allowed to build. As the rain clouds finally begin to move on, the full scale of the destruction is coming into focus. For many residents, the emotional toll of losing homes, possessions, and a sense of security is now matched by the overwhelming challenge of starting over. For now, the state remains firmly in recovery mode. From government offices to mud-filled neighborhoods, one message is being repeated again and again. Queensland will rebuild, but the impact of the 2026 floods will be felt for generations. And the crisis isn't over.
Farther south, Australia's largest city is now facing its own unfolding emergency. Sydney and its surrounding metropolitan areas are grappling with one of the most severe flooding events in the nation's history. A powerful coastal storm system has stalled along New South Wales, dumping weeks' worth of rain in less than a single day. The result has been catastrophic flooding, forcing thousands from their homes and bringing the economic heart of the southern hemisphere to a near standstill. This disaster began in mid-January 2026 when a blocking weather pattern over the Tasman Sea trapped a deep low-pressure system over the Sydney Basin. Fueled by unusually warm ocean temperatures, the system created a continuous pipeline of moisture-rich air flowing straight into the region. And with the ground already saturated, Sydney is now facing a growing flood emergency, one that's unfolding in real time. Australia's weather agency reports that parts of Sydney were hit with extraordinary rainfall in a very short time. At one central monitoring site, more than 13 inches of rain fell in just 2 days. But the most severe impacts weren't felt in the city centre. In Sydney's western suburbs and the nearby Blue Mountains, the situation escalated rapidly. The terrain there forced moist air upward, intensifying the rainfall and sending massive volumes of runoff downhill. That water surged straight into Warragamba Dam, Sydney's main water supply, which began spilling at a staggering rate, comparable to the volume of Sydney Harbour every single day. While downtown Sydney dealt with flash flooding and transportation chaos, the real disaster unfolded farther west in the Hawkesbury Nepean Valley. This region, often compared to a bathtub because of its geography, saw river levels climb higher than during the major floods of the 1990s and early 2020s. Towns like Windsor, Richmond, and North Richmond were effectively cut off, surrounded by rising water. As the Hawkesbury River reached record levels, hundreds of homes were submerged nearly to their rooftops. Emergency officials issued mandatory evacuation orders for more than 60,000 residents, many of whom had only just rebuilt after earlier floods. Across Greater Sydney, infrastructure was pushed to the brink. Major highways were shut down after landslides and floodwaters made them impassable. Rail service collapsed in several corridors after signaling equipment was submerged, forcing entire train lines to be suspended and leaving tens of thousands of commuters stranded. Even river transport came to a halt. Ferry services were canceled as fast-moving, debris-filled waters surged through the river system, carrying everything from uprooted trees to massive industrial objects downstream. Sydney, a city built to thrive around its waterways, was suddenly at the mercy of them. And as the rain continued to fall, officials warned that the situation remained fluid, changing hour by hour with little margin for error. As floodwaters continued to rise, the impact on essential services became severe. Utility providers reported that roughly 85,000 homes and businesses lost power after electrical substations were shut down as a safety measure. Officials say the move was necessary to prevent explosions and long-term damage as water levels climbed. Water systems were also affected. Several treatment plants in western Sydney were compromised, prompting boil water alerts across multiple local government areas and adding another layer of stress for already displaced residents. In response, New South Wales officials declared a state of natural disaster across 22 local government regions. The declaration activated emergency powers, allowing resources, funding, and personnel to be deployed more quickly. Military support was brought in as conditions worsened. The Australian Defence Force launched emergency flood operations, using helicopters to rescue people trapped on rooftops in hard-hit neighborhoods where roads had completely disappeared underwater. Authorities have confirmed multiple fatalities. 2 motorists were swept away by fast-moving floodwaters, and an elderly man lost his life in an unidentified flooded urban area. Officials continue to urge residents to not enter flood zones under any circumstances. Emergency crews have been pushed to their limits. In just 48 hours, volunteers and first responders carried out more than 600 flood rescues, many of them in darkness, strong currents, and near zero visibility. The economic consequences are expected to be massive. Early estimates suggest the damage to Sydney alone could exceed $2.5 billion. Beyond destroyed homes and businesses, the city's food supply has taken a major hit. The fertile floodplains west of Sydney are now completely underwater. Farmers are reporting total crop losses, and economists warn that grocery prices across the state could jump sharply in the coming weeks as shortages ripple through the supply chain. For Sydney, this disaster is no longer just about water. It's about recovery, resilience, and the long-term cost of a city pushed beyond its limits. The fallout is now spreading far beyond floodwaters. Sydney's construction industry, already under pressure for labor shortages, has largely ground to a halt. Major infrastructure projects have been delayed as job sites remain flooded and soil conditions become too unstable to build on. This disaster has reignited a fierce political debate over where and how cities should expand. Critics argue that for years, governments have allowed dense housing developments in flood-prone areas of the Hawkesbury-Nepean Valley, despite repeated warnings. Urban planning experts say this flood is a collision of outdated decisions with a more extreme climate. They warn that continuing to place families in high-risk zones is no longer sustainable, and that the financial burden of repeated recovery efforts is becoming overwhelming for taxpayers. The crisis has renewed calls to raise the height of Warragamba Dam, a long-debated proposal aimed at reducing flood risk downstream. Supporters say it's essential for public safety, while opponents argue it would damage environmentally sensitive land and threaten areas of deep cultural significance to Indigenous communities. As rainfall finally begins to ease, attention is shifting towards cleanup and recovery. The Insurance Council has officially classified the floods as a catastrophe, allowing claims to be fast-tracked. But for many residents, the damage goes far beyond what insurance can cover. After multiple floods in just a few years, insurance has become unaffordable and relocation feels impossible. The emotional toll is heavy, with uncertainty replacing any sense of security. To address the immediate crisis, state officials have opened emergency evacuation centers across the city. These shelters are providing temporary housing, mental health support, and financial assistance to those displaced. But as Sydney begins the long road forward, one reality is becoming clear. Rebuilding homes may be possible, but rebuilding trust, stability, and confidence in the future will take far longer. If you liked the analysis in this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Please share this video with your friends, family members, and relatives. And finally, if you found this report helpful, please hit the like button. This helps us beat the algorithm and ensures this truth reaches more people who need to hear it. Thank you for watching.